In 2019, the population of vampires surpassed 95%, and the ever-growing horde of bloodsuckers faced imminent extinction, since the food supply was scarce. The lack of human blood turned groups of vampires into uncontrollable and ruthless creatures that ravish any vampire that crosses their path in a desperate attempt to survive. This urgent reality, where vampires feed on each other, puts pressure on vampire and hematologist Dr. Edward Dalton's shoulders, who runs against time to find artificial blood supplies and prevent the total extinction of his creed, and who has to count on unlikely allies. Another beautiful day begins, with shy beams of sunlight, as a focused little girl writes a letter in her dark bedroom. She looks around 8 years old, but her eyes and worries give her face a much older appearance. She's home alone, tired, and hungry. It looks like she has lost all her hope. As soon as she finishes writing her letter, she walks outside, on this sunny day that's about to arise, and sits in the garden. Back in her bedroom, the content of her letter is revealed. She says she's tired, and that she'll never grow up, and never change. The sun rises faster, and the bright-eyed vampire girl screams in unbearable pain as she burns to ashes. The conflict between vampires and humans is evident, as this old male vampire watches a heated interview on the TV news that night. The hostility towards humans is evident, but also against their own kind. Dr. Edward Dalton, a quiet and mysterious hematologist who happens to be a vampire as well, starts his night shift at the lab. We must remember that the vampire population can't go out in daylight, or they could burn away. Edward Dalton, Charles Bromley, and his team of scientists attend an urgent meeting that reveals the vampire population is going through a dramatic shortage of blood supply, and that Dalton is responsible for managing the situation to find a solution under Bromley's authority. During a conversation at Bromley's office, Dalton learns that Bromley's daughter couldn't take the fact that her father became such a terrible creature, and so she ran away. Bromley notices that Dalton doesn't seem like a regular vampire, uncontrollably thirsty for human blood. Bromley's suspicion raises some red flags, and he decides to keep an eye on Ed Dalton. Regardless of Bromley's suspicion, Dalton keeps on working at his lab on an experiment, with a new alternative to the scarce human blood. The trial is a huge failure. Meanwhile, riots on the streets for real blood keep going, and making casualties. Dalton is worried sick with the situation, and gets distracted while driving, and collides with another car. He is caught by surprise by a group of desperate humans, trying to escape the rage of starving vampires, and gets hurt. Although the danger is right in front of him, he notices that the group is trying to save themselves, and offers help. The group of humans gets into his car, and Dalton activates the daytime shields on the windows as a police car approaches. We are not sure why Dalton saves that group, but the truth is he lies to the cops, and lets the group of humans run away safe and sound. The sun is about to come up, and Dalton arrives home after that hectic day. It looks like he has an ordinary and boring life. He arrives home, and has something to eat, and takes care of his plants. But to his surprise, Frankie Dalton, his brother, arrives home after some time away. He brings his big brother a gift, a bottle of human blood. That's when we learn that Ed Dalton doesn't drink human blood anymore. He's what we could call in parallel terms, a vegetarian. The Dalton brothers can't reach an agreement on the consumption of human blood, and argue over the bottle. Frankie smashes the bottle on the wall, and to their unpleasant surprise, a starving and agonized deformed vampire attacks them to have a sip of the blood. The police do their job and investigate what happened. They reveal the creature's identity, and Ed Dalton immediately recognizes the name. That horrendous monster used to be his gardener, and his mutation took place in only a few days. That's a piece of new information that Ed Dalton can't let go of, and must add to his research. As if the day hadn't been chaotic enough, when Ed Dalton finally sits down to have some rest, his house alarm gets activated, and he is faced with one of the humans he helped earlier that night, holding a crossbow to his head. The surprises keep coming. The woman asks for Ed's help to survive. He's intrigued, but also runs against time to ensure his species' survival, and human blood seems to be the only alternative available, even though human existence is crumbling. Ed Dalton follows the woman's instructions and drives to the rendezvous in broad daylight despite his nocturnal nature. That should be a sign of trust between them. Ed meets a man who seems to be the leader of the human group and is the one who summoned Ed. The day is bright, but Ed doesn't look very worried. The two men are so engaged in their conversation that they don't notice that the woman, Aubrey, was captured by a heavily armed vampire. That's Frankie, who followed his brother and warned the vampire authorities of Ed's meeting with humans. Before all the mess that follows up this unexpected car chase, Elvis, the leader of the humans, reveals to Ed that he was once a vampire, but found a cure for his condition, and that he needs Ed's help at all costs. Ed Dalton doesn't have time to react or answer Elvis' request. His brother and the vampire police chase them and shoot at their cars relentlessly. The improbable group of humans and vampires run away in Ed's car. By now, the night has come, and Aubrey thanks Ed Dalton for his help, but Ed doesn't look too proud of it, since he left his brother to perish. They stop for a while, and Elvis tells Ed his story, from a thirsty and desperate vampire to a weak, but alive, human being. Elvis was incredibly confused and weakened by the shortage of blood and crashed his car once. He was thrown through the car's windshield and instantly burned until he fell into a clear river. Much to his surprise, minutes later he found shelter under a bridge and realized that brief exposure to the sun had turned him into a human again. It's a dangerous move, but the only chance the vampire population has to avoid imminent extinction. Ed Dalton is just perplexed. Meanwhile, his brother Frankie recovers from being exposed to the sun and meets Bromley for a debrief. Frankie guarantees Bromley that he'll do whatever it takes to preserve their species, and he meant it. Back in Ed's car, Aubrey worries that he's weak, given the hours without eating, and serves him a cup of her own blood, against his will. The odd group of humans and vampires arrive at what seems to be an abandoned mansion that reveals a community of people. Ed is on edge, but takes in the information he is given. Back on the streets, where vampires go on with their lives at night, a group of hungry vampires attack a coffee joint that has now reduced the percentage of blood in the coffee to 5% only. The vampires lose control and go wild. Ed Dalton and Elvis roll up their sleeves and begin to work on Ed's research for a way out. The chemistry between the hematologist and the former vampire is apparent, and that makes the research process smoother than expected. Aubrey is the one who always tries to ease Ed's mind and works as the group's diplomatic bridge. During an honest conversation, Ed tells Aubrey he became a vampire against his will, thanks to his brother's betrayal. Ed interrupts the chat the minute he sees a wine processor, and it looks like a light was switched on in his mind. They get to work. On the outside, another member of the human group gathers more people who struggle to survive in the wild. One of these people is Allison Bromley, but it seems like her rescuers don't know her identity. They quickly fall into a trap and are surrounded by the vampire police officers, who are heavily armed and fire at will. Allison finds a way to use the radio and contacts Elvis at the HQ, but is surprised by a shot and falls. She's taken to her father, Charles Bromley, who patronizes her efforts to run away from him. In a desperate attempt to run, Allison stabs her father, but is knocked down at the elevator. Aubrey, Elvis, and Ed get ready for Ed's mission under the sun to become a human being again. He burns for a few seconds, twice or 3 times, until Aubrey hears a heartbeat from the man who was once a vampire. Ed Dalton is back in his human form. Back at his lab, Bromley has his wound treated and commands Frankie on a mission to turn Allison into a vampire. The mission is quickly accomplished. The moment Ed wanted so much, where he would stand under sunny skies and not perish, has come, and he's ready to go into retaliation mode along with Elvis and Aubrey. The power trio arrive at the group's safe cabin, but everyone has been shot. They reached a loose end, while Bromley's forces work full speed to deal with the vampires who became vicious creatures, and one of them is Allison Bromley. Charles Bromley proves that he'll do whatever it takes to preserve the species. Elvis, Ed, and Aubrey seek for help. They invade Dr. Chris's house. He is also a doctor and friends with Ed. Ed tries to convince him that he has found a way out for the vampires to become humans again. But the man is skeptical and Aubrey notices it. The house is stormed by Bromley's officers, who shoot Aubrey. Ed and Elvis manage to run, but without her. Help comes from the most unexpected side, Frankie Dalton. He emotionally confesses to his brother that he wants to stay beside him and volunteers to help find Aubrey, but ends up biting Elvis instead. Ed makes a dangerous move by going to Bromley's office, asking for help to become a vampire again. It sounds like he has regretted going back to his human form, and that pisses Aubrey off. Meanwhile, Bromley tells Ed he doesn't need him anymore, since Dr. Chris has already found the artificial alternative to human blood. Ed tries to get Bromley out of control, so he would bite him out of rage, and Bromley doesn't disappoint. After Frankie bites Elvis, he immediately begins his process of becoming human again. In his office, Bromley screams in pain as he becomes human, and his goons smell his fear. Charles Bromley is torn apart in the lab's elevator as Ed and Aubrey try to escape. Frankie gives them a little help, but is brutally caught by Bromley's officers. Ed mourns the loss of his brother, but knows that is the beginning of a real change towards the cure. One by one, the vampire officers bite the humans and turn back into people as well. Up to that point, the laboratory has become a nasty scenario. That's when Dr. Chris makes his last attempt to stop Ed Dalton, but is stopped by Elvis's arrow right through his heart. Dr. Chris did everything he could to avoid the extinction of the vampire species, but it was too late for them. Humankind is on the verge of becoming dominant again, and it is just a matter of time for all vampires to either perish or let go of resistance and get back to their humanity.